Donald Neilson was a ruthless killer who would stop at nothing to succeed in his enterprise.
You're dealing with a killer, a callous, vicious man.
I put my knee across Neilson's throat, put the gun to his head and said, "I'll kill you, you."
In the 1970s, I was a young television reporter working a lot in the north of England, and I vividly recall the name of Donald Neilson, also known as the Black Panther, and his reign of terror. For 10 years, he was hunted by the police for robbery, kidnap and murder. Communities in central England were petrified of the deadly man in the black balaclava. But how did Neilson get away with his crime spree? And couldn't he have been brought to justice a lot sooner? I'm Fred Dinage, and as the official biographer to the Cray twins, I quickly learned that the myth of crime can often overtake the facts of what actually happened. That's why I'm reinvestigating some of Britain's most evil murderers. In the 1970s, the killer Donald Neilson terrified central England. Not only did he kill 3 postal workers, but he kidnapped a 17-year-old girl from her bedroom. She too would end up dead. Donald Neilson was born on the 1st of August 1936, just a few miles outside of Bradford. Growing up in wartime Britain meant that family life was tough for the young boy, especially as his father was a strict disciplinarian, something that would rub off on Neilson in later life. I'm always fascinated by the early lives of murderers and the way their childhood might have had an impact on the crimes they would later commit. It's a fascination that's shared by one of Britain's leading criminologists, David Wilson.
When he was growing up, he was called Donald Nappey, and therefore he was bullied at school. People would taunt him by using his surname, Dirty Nappy, Nipper Nappy, and so forth. So he didn't progress as he might have progressed at school. And also, because he was so small, he never grew to being taller than 5'6". There's a sense in which he didn't quite fit in. He's incredibly close to his mother, but when he's 10, his mother dies. And that leads to the first time he gets into trouble. He breaks into the local co-op, and therefore the first brush with the law.
It wasn't until Neilson turned 18 that he found some direction in his life. Up until 1963, national service was mandatory. Neilson was one of 2 million men conscripted to serve 2 years in the British Army. One man who, in the 1970s, reported on the Panthers' case and trial is Andrew Wright. He met some of the key characters involved, and he's agreed to share with me what he knows.
He loved the army, absolutely loved it. He was called up for national service, and he did his normal training. Surprisingly, he failed his Bren gun training, so he had to go and do his 10-week training course all over again. He later said that he'd done that on purpose, and it wouldn't surprise me, actually, because he so loved the army.
He just wanted to carry on.
It was the happiest part of his life so far.
Neilson served in Kenya, Cyprus and Aden during his 2 years in the army. Such was his devotion that he only asked for one break. That was to marry his childhood sweetheart, Irene. It was a secret affair, and neither Donald nor Irene's family were told of the ceremony. By 1960, they had a daughter, Kathryn, so Donald left the army in search of a new career to support his family.
So he's come out of the army, he's a married man, he's going to try and find a job, he's going to try and find some place to live. But he's a drifter, he's restless. He's never been much of an apprentice. He's developed carpentry skills, plumbing skills, but nothing that he does, he's really able to stick at.
I think probably his most successful enterprise was, in fact, doing building for various people. But it didn't make him a lot of money, and he yearned to do better.
So he's ruthless and listless, and crucially, he needs to find a way of explaining that, not just to those people around him, like his wife, but he needs to find a way of explaining not getting on to himself.
I think he was fairly cheesed off because he was working his what's-its off, and around him he saw various people, particularly immigrants, I think, who he felt were getting money off the state, and he didn't see why they should get more money than he was actually earning. So in the winter months, he turned to crime.
By 1965, aged 29, Neilson began breaking into houses and targeted the middle classes. He believed they were the only people to keep their money at home.
Now, he's incredibly successful as a house burglar. Indeed, there are some 400 burglaries which he is believed to have committed, and he was never caught by the police. He would keep the newspaper cuttings of the burglaries when they were reported. As a psychologist, a criminologist, I know that often offenders will take cuttings of their crimes, often in a voyeuristic way. But in relation to Neilson, the indication is that he kept those cuttings as a way of informing himself. And it was almost as if it was a manual that he was training himself up so that he could become a better burglar.
And Neilson wanted a better life for his family. He changed their surname from Nappey to Nielson to avoid his daughter Kathryn suffering the same bullying he'd experienced. They had no idea about his secret life and also played an unwitting role in helping him prepare for his robberies.
Unlike a family that goes out into the park to go for a picnic or whatever, Neilson would take them on manoeuvres. He would go and hide in the woods and have them find him. So these were like trial runs, if you like, and the family were intimately bound up with these trial runs, although there's absolutely no evidence to indicate that they were aware of what Neilson was doing behind their backs.
The house robberies gave Neilson enough cash to get through the winter, but he wanted to make more. He was after more money for the risks he was taking. Neilson decided to move to the next level. Back in the 1970s, many villages in the Midlands had small community post offices where people used to keep their money. Neilson decided to adapt the techniques he'd used for breaking into people's houses to entering small post offices in the middle of the night. Neilson was meticulous in his preparation. He would spend weeks studying the layout of his intended target. He made every attempt to ensure he'd never be caught.
He's usually masked, he's dressed in black, he's clearly wearing gloves, he's carrying a gun. The gun was loaded. This wasn't just for show. He was intending to use these weapons.
To get some insight into the mind of an armed robber, I've arranged a meeting with Tom Carrigan. In the 80s and 90s, he committed a series of armed robberies on post offices and banks. He was released having served a 9-year sentence. How did your own life of crime begin?
I was about 15 when I robbed my first shop. And we got in with people who were a bit older than us and who were a bit more ruthless than us as well. And so going along on robberies with those kind of people, gave us a sense of ruthlessness as well to carry out, serious armed robberies with loaded weapons.
Did it never occur to you could kill somebody?
Yeah.
But it didn't worry you?
Didn't worry us, no. My consciousness about who might be a victim to me was secondary to what I wanted, So if I'm going to rob something, I'm going to go in there fully and just take what I need, take what I want. No one's going to stand in my way.
This was a motto that Donald Neilson also stood by as he began breaking into post offices throughout central and northern England. The first 9 he attempted, including this one, were successful. The 10th, though, was to change his life and the lives of the family he encountered forever. Donald Neilson was 37 when he targeted a small sub-post office in Harrogate, 20 miles north of his home. As the Skepper family slept inside, Neilson turned off the power to the alarm and entered the premises. But things didn't go to plan.
I think in the past he'd relied on creeping into somebody's bedroom and finding the keys, either on a bedside table or concealed in somebody's trousers or something. This time he couldn't find any, and he therefore had to go and wake somebody up.
Neilson forced the postmaster's 18-year-old son at gunpoint to search for the keys. Unable to find them, the Black Panther marched the son into his father's bedroom. Donald Skepper woke immediately. He was faced with a man dressed in black, pointing a shotgun at him. Realizing the intruder was alone, the postmaster leapt out of bed to attack him.
Get in!
Neilson didn't hesitate in pulling the trigger, killing Donald Skepper dead in front of his family. He escaped without stealing any money, leaving a scene of devastation behind.
If you're constantly getting your money, getting access to your money by committing robbery and never being caught, then it's like going to the office. Has he had a good day at the office? He gets lots of money. A bad day at the office, somebody tries to stop him, he has to shoot them. But he sees it as simply an occupation. This gives him the stature that's denied to him by only being 5'6". This gives him the confidence that's knocked out of him at school because his surname was Nappey. These things are really central in trying to explain the story of the Black Panther.
Neilson had no remorse for the man he'd murdered. It was a warning to other postal workers not to get in his way. The Black Panther wouldn't be afraid to kill again to get what he wanted. I'm Fred Dinage, and I'm investigating the crimes of the Black Panther, Donald Neilson. How did he manage to murder 4 people, commit over 400 robberies, and evade the police for so long? In 1974, Neilson was being hunted by the police for the murder of postmaster Donald Skepper. The thief was now a killer, but it didn't deter him from continuing with his spate of robberies.
In one very successful robbery, after the first shooting, he escapes with something like £4,500, and he goes and cashes the postal orders that he got from that robbery in the Midlands, whereas in fact he'd robbed in the north. And in signing for the postal order, he'll often use pseudonyms which are deliberately chosen to taunt the police. So for example, he'll sign a name saying B Where or C Trail, because the postal order can be traced back to the particular post office that was robbed, and he's taunting the police. He's letting the police know, I've got one over on you.
He had rules, and those rules were things like he would always take money, cash, and orders, things that couldn't be traced. He'd never have a third party involved, so he didn't have to fence stuff. And he always had an escape route completely planned out.
Unlike Neilson, Tom Carrigan never pulled the trigger when he was an armed robber. But he does know the mentality needed to commit such frightening crimes.
When you had hurt people, did you feel badly about it?
No. I'm robbing a shop, I'm robbing a post office, I'm robbing a bank. In my head, there wasn't any victims to what I was doing, because this was an institute I was robbing, or something that had loads of money. Everybody knows or should know, to stay out the way. If you get in the way, it's your choice, So if you want to come against, somebody with a mask and a loaded shotgun, with a clear intent to not get caught, then you have to live with that consequence.
Away from crime, Neilson continued to try and live a normal family life. He spent his time renovating his house into flats, which he rented out to make extra money. His home life was becoming fractious. With his daughter, he was a strict disciplinarian. He punished any of her misdemeanors with lengthy periods of what he would call hard labor, forcing her to move piles of bricks across the yard for no reason. She had no idea her father was living a murderous double life.
From his time in the army, Neilson had developed a fascination with guns. His attic was like an armoury, full of deadly weapons, an arsenal with which to plan his next post office raid. In September 1974, 8 months after his first killing, another post office raid went terribly wrong.
Neilson had targeted a small post office in Accrington, an hour west of his home. He'd made his usual preparations, but failed to discover that the owner, Derek Astin, was an ex-Royal Marine, a man who was willing to fight to protect his premises and family.
He was, again, woken from his bed. Don't know what woke him, but got out of bed, and I seem to recall that his wife pushed the only thing that was available beside them, bizarrely, a vacuum cleaner, and said, attack him with this. He managed to get him out of the bedroom and onto the landing, where he was shot at almost point-blank range in the shoulder.
The wounded postmaster bravely fought with the masked intruder, and summoning all his strength, he threw him down the stairs. Neilson then pulled a second weapon from his jacket.
He was shot for his troubles with a .22. The gun was fired up the stairs, and it unfortunately entered his body in an upwards trajectory which went through his stomach. And the poor guy died very soon afterwards.
Neilson was now a double murderer. It didn't seem to affect him, though. As far as he was concerned, it was just one of the jobs he needed to do to avoid capture. The 2 murders of postal workers in the space of 8 months had not only grabbed the police's attention, but also that of the press. The headlines described the robberies, however, nobody had witnessed the Black Panther's face. Descriptions were vague, photo fits differed.
He was about 5'6", pretty stocky, very dark hair, slightly swarthy. I mean, when he went out, he must have presented quite a menacing figure, because he would have been dressed in black with a black hood. He had a number of hoods with him, always. In fact, that was a characteristic. He always had spares of everything.
How did Neilson see himself?
I think Nielson did not see himself as an offender. He used so many techniques of neutralization to justify his behavior. He was just an honest bloke being prevented from making his way in the world because there are too many rich people, too many people on benefits. A working class fellow can't get a start in life, must turn to crime if he's going to provide for his family. And I think crucially, a lot of the dressing up, that wearing the camouflage gear, wearing the mask, all of this gives us a clue, a window into thinking about his psychology.
It's almost like a roller coaster. You know, your mask is on your head and you're ready, you've got everything, you've got your weapons in place, everything's in place now. The fantasy's now just about to become real. And so you're at the height of one of the best feelings that I've ever had. You know, and the last thing you want to do is make that not happen. You know, and so as soon as you pull that mask down, you become somebody else. You psychologically cut yourself off from being a caring human being.
Neilson had established a routine. In the summer, he would carry out work as a joiner and take his family on inexpensive holidays. As the winter months approached and the work dried up, he'd begin planning his next set of robberies.
Neilson was probably unaware that his next victim had also spent time in the forces. He'd also suffered 4 years as a prisoner of war. Sidney Grayland and his wife Peggy were in their mid-50s and ran the local post office in Langley.
He always claimed to have thoroughly researched each of his targets. And I don't think he can have done in the Grayland case, because the Graylands had a very specific routine. Sidney Grayland always, after he'd received the mail and seen the last mail out of the place, he would then go and do a locking up procedure and go and fetch the car ready to take his wife home. And he stuck to that routine. Everybody said that. But this night, when he went out, his wife heard a bump, and lo and behold, he'd encountered the Black Panther.
Peggy Grayland went into their garage and discovered her husband Sidney slumped on the floor. He tried to warn her he'd been shot. Before she could react, an unmasked Donald Neilson attacked her.
I think he pistol whipped her, and she was really just very lucky to live, to be honest. It was only because two policemen on their rounds realised something was wrong. They saw the lights burning when they shouldn't have been burning and went and investigated and found a scene of carnage.
Donald Neilson had committed his third murder. Thankfully, Peggy Grayland survived. She gave police the first description of the unmasked Black Panther.
Neilson knew the police now had a clearer picture of what he looked like. He was also concerned that post office security had become too tight to continue his robberies. But crime was his main source of income, and he wasn't willing to stop. He would soon be wreaking more havoc through central England, this time as a kidnapper.
I'm Fred Dinage, and I'm investigating the murders committed by Donald Neilson, otherwise known as the Black Panther. Back in 1975, Neilson was being hunted by the police for killing 3 postal workers. Despite taking almost 30,000 witness statements, they were no closer to uncovering the identity of the brutal murderer.
The crimes that he's committing are becoming far more serious, and they're becoming far more serious because, of course, he's not caught. He begins to incorporate the identity of being a super offender, somebody who can evade capture, somebody who's got one over on the police.
There were police forces from 4 different counties hunting the criminal responsible for the spate of post office murders. For my investigation, I've gone to meet a man who was involved in the case. Detective Inspector Harold Wright would eventually come face to face with Donald Neilson.
People had seen and heard him speaking, and by now we knew that we were dealing with a killer about 5'5", well built, very fit, you see. Yeah. We knew so much about him, but we hadn't got his name and address. He hadn't been fingerprinted, that was the thing. If he'd had a bit of form, he'd have been arrested before, without any doubt.
By 1975, Neilson had made over £40,000 from robbing houses and post offices. However, the career criminal believed the risk he was taking deserved to bring him more reward. He believed kidnap would be a more lucrative venture, and he already had the perfect victim in mind.
While flicking through his local paper, Neilson stumbled across what to most may appear to be an innocuous article. It highlighted how a local businessman who ran his family coach company had left £82,000 to his daughter, Lesley Whittle, and £107,000 to his son, Ronald. The company was doing well and became a prime target for Neilson.
Neilson spent 3 years devising a plan to kidnap one of the Whittles and hold them for ransom. He would later tell police that he'd targeted Ronald, but it was 17-year-old Lesley who would suffer at his hands.
This is the first time he's going to literally take another person and have that person with him through the commission of a crime. But remember, by the time he's kidnapped Lesley Whittle, he has murdered 3 people.
She was just a very ordinary teenage girl with a boyfriend and went to college in Wolverhampton, and nobody had a bad word to say about her.
On the evening of January the 14th, 1975, Donald Neilson travelled 140 miles south to the Whittle family home in Highley. It was a stormy evening, and Lesley wouldn't have heard anyone enter her room. During that night, she came face to face with the Black Panther, her kidnapper.
I can't imagine what her whole ordeal would have been like. It must have been horrendous for her. From the moment when she was taken, kept in the back of her car, underneath a piece of foam mattress, if the Panther's to be believed, transported all that way. I mean, it must have taken, I would think, at least an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours to get to Kidsgrove. And then taken down through this series of tunnels No, I can't really imagine it. To a place that was dark and dank and, horrible. Absolutely horrible for her.
I've travelled to Kidsgrove in Staffordshire to visit the park where Lesley was held. I want to learn why this location became so instrumental in the Black Panther case. Bathpool Park these days is a pleasant enough spot, the centre of the local community, but no one knew back in 1975 that 17-year-old Lesley was being held hostage in a drainage ditch like that with a wire noose around her neck. It was pitch black down there. She'd no idea where she was or if anyone was going to come and save her.
All that she would have heard during that time is the vermin down in the shaft moving about down there. She wouldn't have heard voices or anything of that nature from ground level. She might have heard the trains going by. There's a railway line, of course, some 50 yards away from the top of the shaft. She'd possibly have heard trains moving, and that's all that she would have heard, vermin and trains.
When Nielson kidnapped Lesley, he left a ransom note on her bed. It told the Whittle family if they wanted to see her alive, they had to act quickly. Her brother, Ronald, was instructed to take £50,000 to a phone box near Birmingham. The kidnapper believed getting the money would be easy, but he'd underestimated just what was involved, and so had the police.
Kidnapping was a very isolated type of crime in those days. This was one of the first major kidnappings in the country.
Everything about this kidnapping goes wrong. Nielson had left a ransom note, which is discovered, and it says, don't call the police. The ransom was going to be £50,000. Now, the first thing the family did, the right thing the family did, was to obviously telephone the police.
West Mercia police wanted to keep Lesley's kidnap secret. They feared if the Black Panther knew they were involved, he would kill Lesley and disappear. Their secrecy didn't last long. Within hours, her kidnap had been leaked to the media and was being reported live on the local news. It was soon hitting the headlines all over the UK.
And you know, Fred, it is a very, very key case in this respect. The handling by the police of the media in the Lesley Whittle case was an utter, complete disaster.
The police feared that media coverage had scared the Black Panther away. They told Lesley's brother not to make the ransom drop. It was a mistake. Donald Neilson had been waiting for the money.
The police have had to learn how to engage the media appropriately so that the media don't conduct their own inquiries, so that the media will stay on side, but nonetheless staying on side, giving them something so that they can put out on the 6 o'clock news.
Remarkably, Donald Neilson was undeterred by the press coverage. He contacted Ronald Whittle again and told him to follow a series of clues he'd written. They would eventually tell him where to leave the £50,000 ransom. But Neilson's instructions weren't clear. Professor David Wilson is going to show me why Ron Whittle's attempt to give the Black Panther his ransom was doomed from the start.
So, why have you brought me here?
So I've written a series of puzzles which I've placed around about the park, very much in the way that Donald Neilson had left clues for the police, for the family of Lesley Whittle to follow. And this Dymo tape is the kind of thing that Neilson wrote his clues upon. So can you follow the clues?
Walk on path, round corner to second right goalpost, stop for instructions. Second right goalpost, so it isn't the one I thought it was.
Which one do you think it is?
It's going to be this one then. Is it this? It's confusing, but there's something in the back of the net here, so this could be another clue.
I can tell you now, it isn't another clue. You've come quite rightly because you saw a bag there, but actually it was this goalpost you should have gone to. There.
So already I would have messed it up. Over the next 5 days, Ron Whittle failed several times to deliver the ransom. The clues he was given had no punctuation, were ambiguous, and only made sense to Neilson himself. So this one says, Follow tree line to 5th tree from left of end of path to get instruction. But which end of the path? Does it mean that end or that end?
You see, this is part of the problem. You've got to interpret how he thinks and then communicates to you.
Well, I would guess it's that way, but it's
Okay.
only or is it this path here?
Morning.
Morning. Does that count as 1, or is that number 1?
Ronald was sent another demand. It told him to drive through the night to a park in Kidsgrove. Little did he know it was the same place where his sister was being held.
When Ron Whittle got to the phone box he'd been directed to, he couldn't find the dymo tape. It had in fact been pushed down the back of the board of the payphone. Nevertheless, Ron couldn't find it. He did eventually find it, but he spent some 20 minutes literally searching the phone box, and he must have been in a right old state anyway.
Another problem Ronald faced was that the Black Panther had left all the clues in public places.
So this we're saying is tree number 5. Where's the clue?
Well, that's a very good question, because I know where I placed it and it's not there. And therefore it's fallen down or it's been moved.
So it may have dropped around here somewhere. There we are.
That's the clue.
It's the first thing I've got right so far. It's
And what does
incredible.
it say?
It says, put bag with money into ditch by next tree.
But there's another problem.
Which way?
Which way? Which
God.
way did he mean?
What
Which
a-
by the next tree? Is it that tree or is it that tree there?
What a nightmare.
It's clear to see that with time against him and in a distressed state, Ronald Whittle would have had no chance following the Black Panther's demands. The last clue took him to Bathpool Park, where he waited for a torchlight to flash at him. But again, he'd misread Nielson's instructions and was in the wrong place.
Nielson was obviously watching from a vantage point. Ron Whittle had been directed to look for Nielson flashing a light, a torch. Nielson saw, in fact, a police car early on. He said he saw a helicopter, something denied by the police. And he started to believe that a police operation had been put together. So he was spooked.
Donald Neilson made several attempts to collect the ransom, but each time he failed. A week after Leslie's kidnap, communication stopped. The Whittle family had no idea if Leslie was dead or alive, and worse was yet to come.
I'm Fred Dinage, and I'm investigating the crimes Donald Neilson committed in the 1970s. He killed anybody who would get in his way,
And now he was responsible for the kidnapping of a 17-year-old girl called Lesley Whittle. Donald Neilson disappeared when he didn't receive the ransom he demanded for Lesley Whittle's safe return. The search was now on, not only to catch the man known in the media as the Black Panther, but also to find Lesley Whittle. 7 weeks had passed after the failed ransom drop at Bathpool Park. Now Harold Wright and his team carried out a proper search of the area. They discovered a tunnel running 60 feet under the park. Inside, they found Lesley Whittle's dead body. She'd been hanged.
It was a shocking sight when a 17-year-old girl, wired noose round her neck, hanging down there in pitch darkness. That poor girl had been hanging there possibly for several days before she died. Even if he'd meant the girl to remain alive, he'd left her 60 feet underground with a wire noose round her neck so that if she'd slipped, she'd have hung herself. So she couldn't move about off the landing or anything. She was fastened there like a dog.
The search for the Black Panther went cold. There'd been no new post office raids or kidnaps, but the police weren't giving up.
Every day, we briefed 150 officers or thereabouts as to what had gone on during the previous 24 hours while they'd been on duty, you know. And this was every day for 9 months. It's not thing that died away and then come back again.
It was by pure chance that Stuart Mackenzie became involved in the case. He was a bobby on the beat at the time.
Now I'm going to find out how he and his colleague Tony White became instrumental in the capture of the Black Panther.
We were sat down a side road, catching up on the previous night's paperwork. And whilst we were sat there, Tony looked up through the front windscreen of the car and said, "See that chap there? I don't like the way he's walking. Something wrong with him." So he says, "Come on, let's go and check him out." So I drove the car and we pulled up at the side of him. Tony then wound the window down of the car and said, "Good evening, sir. Would you mind telling us your details?" And the next thing I hear is, "Don't move. Any tricks and you're dead." To which I sort of looked to me left and saw that I was looking down the business end of a sawn-off shotgun. To which my words were, "Hell."
Donald Neilson forced Tony White into the back and climbed into the passenger seat.
And then he put the gun in my armpit and he said, "Drive, any tricks and you're dead." Of course I said, "Well, where to?" He says, "Just drive, any tricks and you're dead."
The Black Panther demanded they drive him to Blidworth, a town 6 miles away. At no point were they to look at him or each other. Slowly, Stuart's colleague managed to change his position on the back seat.
At that point, we got eye contact. And my main concern was, sort of kept doing that. In other words, get this gun from out of my armpit. And he kept going, sort of shaking his head and saying no. And I'm going down towards this junction. And I said, "That's it, I'm lost." I said, "I don't know whether we go right here." And I physically swung the car over to the wrong side of the road, or whether we go left, and I swung it back again. And at that point, Nielson looked out the window. I hit the brakes of the car, the gun goes off. And at the same time, I've hit the door and I've rolled out the police car. As I'm doing that, Tony shouts, "He shot me."
Thinking that his partner was dead, Stuart forced Neilson out of the car. In doing so, he grabbed hold of the shotgun that had nearly killed him.
I put my knee across Nielson's chest and throat, put the gun to his head and said, "I'll kill you, you." And I'm not ashamed to say that, because it was our lives that were at risk. And I'm sort of stood like this with an arm lock, and unbeknown to me, he's ferreting under his jacket. And as we found out later, he'd got knives under his coat. That's what he was going for.
Miraculously, Tony White wasn't dead and came to Stuart's aid. Their car had come to a standstill outside a fish and chip shop. The customers came out to help subdue the man who'd attacked the police. In the end, Stuart and Tony had to prevent members of the public killing the man they'd captured. It had taken 10 years, but through a stroke of pure luck, the Black Panther's reign of terror was finally at an end.
Next morning, I was on duty at Kidsgrove when an assistant chief constable from Nottingham phoned up and spoke to me. He said, "I think we've got your man," simple as that. I said, "We'll come over." So we brought him back and we got to Kidsgrove about 1:30 in the morning. But we didn't go to bed. We had a couple of hours talk with Nielson.
What did he say to you?
Well, not admitting anything, but at least he gave us a name and address.
The police searched Nielson's house and quickly discovered the attic. There they found his cache of weapons.
We recovered so many exhibits at the house, we didn't need him to confess to the crime.
You'd got him bang to
We
rights.
got enough evidence to put him before the court and say to the jury, "Well, you decide."
On June the 14th, 1976, Donald Neilson pleaded not guilty to the 9 charges against him, including the murder of 4 people. The trial at Oxford Crown Court meant the public were finally going to hear from the man who'd evaded capture for 10 years.
You know, it's very, very unusual in my experience, and I've been to many court cases about serial offenders. They rarely take the stand. Neilson wanted to go and put his side of the story because he believed he had a side to describe. It's an incredibly arrogant attitude.
And you sat very close in court on a number of occasions to Neilson. What were your impressions of him?
He really did look a little bit evil, menacing. The one time that really stands out for me was when he was handed a weapon, one of the sawn-off shotguns that he'd used in his raids, and just in front of him were all the exhibits. There were 2 rows of exhibits, and there were shells from those guns, and he was handed the gun, and he literally turned it around like that, and everybody in the press box and in the galleries and so on all instinctively ducked.
He almost was trying to present himself as some kind of anti-hero. For example, in terms of robbing the sub-post offices, he said, well, it's government money. Nobody's been harmed, ignoring, of course, the fact that he had murdered 3 sub-postmasters in the commission of those robberies. So he's using a variety of techniques of neutralization to say, don't think of me as this really bad offender. I'm just a regular guy, is the kind of attitude that he's trying to put over.
The crucial part of Neilson's testimony came when he described the death of Lesley Whittle.
He admitted that he ran back down the complex to hide, and he claimed that it was at this point that Lesley went over the edge as she tried to make room for him on what was a fairly narrow ledge. I think it was one of the times he gave himself away, because he said, she saw my face, she saw the panic in my face. And he said, well, you'd always told us that you were wearing a mask. And he said, no, it was my kind of demeanour, and he tried to backtrack, but he had said that.
I think we can dismiss his argument quite simply. He has, by the stage that he kidnapped Lesley, already killed 3 people. I've got no doubt that when he didn't get that ransom, he killed Lesley Whittle.
This was a belief that was also held by the jury, and after just 5 hours deliberation, they returned to give their verdict. Donald Neilson was found guilty. He was given 5 life sentences for the murder of Lesley Whittle and the 3 postmasters.
The judge recommended that Neilson receive a whole life tariff. He's now spending the rest of his life in prison.
The impact of his crimes is still felt amongst the victims and their families today. Stuart Mackenzie and Tony White both received a Queen's Gallantry Medal for capturing Donald Neilson.
It wasn't so much for us, but we'd done something that every policeman in the country had been trying to do, and when we'd arrested him we thought, yes, we've got him. And this medal really is for whole police force to say that we got one of the most evilest, dangerous men that ever walked this earth at that time.
The list of Donald Neilson's crimes makes shocking reading. He committed over 400 robberies, 2 attempted murders, and carried out 4 brutal killings. The facts of this case are extraordinary.
The police took 30,000 witness statements, and still it took a simple coincidence to catch this lone man. It shows that sometimes, no matter how hard the police work, it is a random piece of luck that's the important factor in bringing a criminal to justice. Without that luck, Donald Neilson may never have been caught. Thankfully, he is behind bars and will remain there for the rest of his life.